Evening, everyone. So it's pensions. Now, just some people have been asking a few things in the chat there. I've tried to make a note of some of them to bring up later. If I forget, bring them up later yourself. I'm going to go through pensions first. Now, a few things I want to say here, and I probably should have focused much more on this. I did a video yesterday which included part of this. I don't think I explained it in enough detail, and I tried to talk about several things at once, which is probably not a good idea. But interestingly, the Daily Express today, this is the newspaper front page from the Daily Express today. It's "Don't you dare target triple lock again." Now, if you've been following the news this week and you're aware that Kemi Badenoch is threatening the triple lock, you might think, well, this is unusual. This is the Daily Express wagging its finger at the Conservatives. That's most unlike them. However, if you read it, it's not. Because what it's trying to do is go, oh, the Conservatives seem to be monkeying about, but you can't trust Labour either. Because as a result of Tulip Siddique's resignation, we've got a new pensions minister who is Torsten Bell, Labour MP, who a few years ago was also saying the triple lock is not a great system. Now, so they're basically, yeah, so what this is, the Express is it's like I always say, they always do this. They know that a certain story's gotten about by the Conservatives, and some Conservative MPs reportedly are panicking, by the way, because what Badenoch's doing. And I want to talk about what she's doing strategically, but I want to first of all explain everything that she said. So what they always do this, if there's something come out and they know their readers know about it, what they try and do is a bit of whataboutery. It's like, oh, yeah, the Conservatives, yeah, but Labour want to get rid of it as well, you see, even though they've promised not to. And unlike the Conservatives, they generally keep their promises. But what's going on here with Kemi Badenoch? So first of all, we had Mel Stride. Now, he's her shadow chancellor. So he's working on the Conservatives' economic policies. And he said last year that the triple lock was unsustainable. So triple lock needs to be going. So then what happens, so let me put this up here. Labour put out, oh, wrong one. Labour put out an advert looking like this. They tweet this out. Kemi Badenoch has put pensioners on notice. The Tories would cut the state pension. So then the Conservatives complain. They tweet out, oh, no, God, there it is. They tweet out their little complaint and they say, on a day where Kemi said it was time to tell the truth, the Labour Party is skewing her words for political gain and lying about what she said. We will look at means testing, but the Conservatives have always protected the triple lock. Now, here's the thing, and let's look at this. So this is their quote. This is what the Conservatives have decided to say. Question, so you're actually going to look at the triple lock? Kemi Badenoch, no, we are going to look at means testing. Means testing is something which we don't do properly here. I'm someone who's always said that millionaires should not be getting the winter fuel payments, but what Rachel Reeves has done is the extreme version of that, where people who are actually on the breadline have their own winter fuel payment taken away. We don't have a system that knows how who should get what. That is true, by the way. I completely agree with that, and I think it's mad. I think it's insane on the winter fuel allowance thing that we can have a situation where some people who should get it don't get it because they're not applying for pension credit. It's like HMRC should know. Everyone's. But the reason why we don't have a system that knows is because it's been deliberately set up to let a lot of people not have to report their financial dealings. That's why. But I totally agree with her. We should have a situation where the HMRC knows exactly what everyone is earning. So it should be easy to compile a list and automatically give the winter fuel payment to everyone below a certain level. So I'm going to agree with her there, except to say that the reason we don't have this system is because of people like her. But anyway, she says that's the sort of thing we need to be looking at. The triple lock is a policy which we supported throughout our 14 years in government. Untrue. Rishi Sunak broke it as Chancellor. And she says that was a Conservative policy. Now it is. Now, I am going to say this. There are... Is the triple lock a good policy? It may not be. It may not be. The problem we have, and this is what it was supposed to address and of course never did, is The UK state pension's not very good. And this is up to date, by the way. This is bang up to date. This is the latest data that was published last month. So it's as up to date as you can get. Do note, it says here that it's 2022 based because, of course, although the House, this is from the House of Commons website, although the House of Commons can get up-to-date information on UK data, when it's from other countries, that can take longer. So we have to have the same baseline. And you can see here, what this is it's the pension as a percentage of previous earnings. And, you know, this is not just the state pension as well. This is just pensions in general. So you can see the UK out of this admittedly cherry-picked list of countries, but it's a reasonable spread of countries around Europe. And it's also got the OECD average. So if you compare it with the OECD average, the UK is below. So pensioners in the UK, compared to other countries, not just because you don't compare a pension, you wouldn't just compare the average pension in the UK with the average pension in France or Denmark or something, because, you know, some countries are more expensive or cheaper to live in than others. So you compare pensions ideally as a percentage of earnings, but in this case, it's at the very least as a percentage of previous earnings for those people. So it's still a reasonable measure. It's not the ideal one for me, but it's reasonable. And you can see the UK is quite low. You know, Iceland, Poland, Estonia lower, but, you know, there are ones that are worse off. Actually, Estonia is about the same looking at it, to be fair. But generally speaking, you know, we've got Germany, OECD average. I mean, that's the right spread of economies. That's better. The EU, on average, has pensioners are better off in the EU for various reasons. Portugal is always steaming ahead and things like that. So that is the issue we have. So if you talk about threatening the triple lock, you create two political problems. Even if economically there's a better way to do it, you create two political problems. The first one is that UK pensions are poor compared to other countries as well anyway. And the second problem you come across is what we saw with the winter fuel allowance. You have got people who, there are some people who should be getting the winter fuel allowance and not getting it, so that's fine. But there are lots of people who do not need it. They're not turning their heating down because they're not getting it. They're just chuntering because they wanted the 200 quid. 200 quid a year. 200 quid out of the whole year. Now let me show you something here. I prepared a little Excel spreadsheet in advance. You lucky people. Except I've now forgotten. Where's my pissing thing? There it is. Right. Everyone loves an Excel spreadsheet. My wife absolutely loves it. It's her job. What she doesn't know about Excel is not worth knowing. But I am all right as well. So what I've done here, so this is the pension. I think it's the pension as it's going to be this April. But I've got like the UK pension value. So she's talking about means testing, not the state pension. She's not saying the state pension is going to be means tested. She says the triple lock is going to be means tested. So that straight away means, does it not, that you've got the state pension and some people will have it triple locked and some people won't. So straight away, you're going to have two types of state pension. Now, granted, there is no single universal state pension anyway, because it's dependent on your contributions. But as long as you've been working for a certain amount of time, we assume that you'll make it. I mean, I've got like 8 more years, I think, of contributions to get my full state pension. And that will still leave me some time way off when I can claim it. So we'll assume that everyone, you know, not everyone has access to the full amount, but we assume they are. So you're going to have two types of full state pension, shall we say. Now, what I did here, so the triple lock, for those who don't know, means that the state pension increases in line with either inflation or average earnings or 2.5%, whichever is the greater. So what I've assumed on the left-hand side with the TLP for triple lock pension is I've assumed we'll have a period of 10 years where inflation is at or below target. So it's not going to go up with inflation. Earnings are no higher than 2.5%. So in other words, I'll assume that there's going to be a 10-year period where the state pension goes up by 2.5% a year. And I'm doing that because, first of all, it makes the maths easier. Second of all, that is the lowest a triple locked pension can go up. The lowest it can go up is 2.5% a year. So if you're going to have another type of state pension for people who are earning or have an income, they're not earning anymore, the pensioners, but they have an income above a certain amount. So they're obviously, their state pension is going to go up by a smaller amount, isn't it? Obviously, that's what it would mean. So I've assumed 1.5%. Now you can see what here, because of the compounding, you can see what's going to happen here. After this 10 years time, the difference between the triple locked state pension and not is £1,375.04 per year. So in other words, so you think about it this way, you've got all those pensioners, and I'm talking here because there's different groups of pensioners. I'm talking about pensioners who do not need the winter fuel allowance. They're not necessarily millionaires, but they don't need it. They've got enough. Their heating's on now. They're nice and toasty warm right now, with or without the £200, but they're still aggrieved that they don't get the £200, right? Imagine what they're going to think to this idea of the Tories, which could cost, and this is just me like spitballing numbers, it could be worse than this, which will cost them over £100 a month. Not £200 a year, over £100 a month. And you think this might be economically justified. Again, I'm not attacking the policy on economic grounds. It could well be justified that almost everything should be means tested, including the state pension. And it should be the case that, you probably should say that everyone should get some form of state pension, but having a 2-tier state pension, okay. But politically, it's mad. It's insane. We've seen the fuss, because the Telegraph and the Times and the Daily Express and the Daily Mail and all these people who are up in arms about the removal of the winter, or the means testing of the winter fuel allowance, they're not doing so on behalf of those poor pensioners. They say they are, but they're not. They're doing it on behalf of the rich ones. Because someone told me, like today, I did a video on the Times talking about all the millionaires fleeing the country. And someone made the very good point. They didn't complain about all the doctors and nurses leaving the NHS, did they? They didn't complain about that as being bad for our economy, no. Anyway, I'll go through a few comments before I continue, because I do want to talk about the strategic element of this, because it is really quite remarkable. So when you say about previous gross earnings or previous net earnings, I imagine it'll be gross, but I couldn't tell you, sorry. Says it's expensive to retroactively plug these holes now because there's no decades of compound interest to make it work. We can't afford the current final salary pensions without that compounding. Well, no, this is always the problem, isn't it? This is why when you've got people, well-intentioned people who are talking about the fact there's not enough money in this, there's not enough money in that, people aren't paid enough here, people aren't getting enough with their pensions here, as if Labour can wave a magic wand and correct it all overnight. You've got to remember, we've had 14 years of the Conservatives squeezing all of these budgets and squeezing the economy at the same time. And that has a compounding effect. You don't just get So, for example, here, just to point out, because for the maths here, for those who don't do a lot of this stuff all the time, when I say this one over here, sorry, let's click this, is 2.5%. That doesn't mean to say I've just times 2.5% by 10 and added 25% to this value. That's not how it works, because the first year this is this figure with 2.5% added, but then in the second year you've already got this, so it's like 102.5% time plus another 2.5%. So the whole thing compounds really quite a lot. But when you shrink something, that compounds as well. So we've had 14 years of shrinking in real terms, shrinking GDP, shrinking incomes, shrinking... Actually, the pensions haven't shrunk in real terms because of the triple lock, which was sustained for most of it, not all of it, but for most of it. So pensions have actually gone up. But you've had all of this shrinkage. That's compounded as well, to the point where, our tax rate as a proportion of our GDP is really high. It's spectacularly high. People are saying Rachel Reeves just needs to tax more, just needs to tax more. And I think there are a few little taxes she could have applied still that she didn't. Fair enough. But not really very much. You really can't just massively increase the tax rate on what it is now. It's really high. It's spectacularly high. And it's the reason why it's not enough to pay for all the things that we should have is two reasons. First of all, the economy actually shrunk in real terms. So the economy is not large enough to sustain the amount of tax receipts we need. But secondly, Labour aren't just having taxes should just be there for maintenance, and every now and then we should be like, we should at any one time have some long-term capital projects, right? But most of the taxes should be spent on maintenance, like paying the wages of public sector workers and maintaining buildings and things like that. But Labour are having to find money to do all that and rebuild everything that was broken, that the Tories just allowed to collapse. School buildings, hospital buildings, other public buildings, rail networks, road networks, all of these things were just allowed to dilapidate. And Labour have got to find the money to do all of that. And they can't do it overnight. And people go, but we need this, we need that, we need this other. It's like, yeah, we ain't got the money for it. Because we're having to pay for maintenance, we're having to pay for wages and maintenance of all the infrastructure we have, as well as find money to build new infrastructure, which we are doing. But, we can't pay for 14 years of neglect, of ruin, of decay straight away. In fact, we couldn't even pay for that in another 14 years because it is that compounding effect of those 14 years of decline. Anyway, so universal benefits are cheaper to administer than means tested benefits. That is absolutely true, yes. So there is, economically speaking, yes, there is a case of what saves you the most money, because means testing is a perfectly valid way of doing things. There's no reason for very wealthy people to have certain benefits they don't really need. But yes, sometimes if the amount you're going to save is very small, sometimes you basically save nothing, as you say, because you've then got to pay people to administer it and decide, well, who qualifies and who doesn't. But even that, the administration of means testing would again be much easier if I put it back up again, Kemi Badenoch herself says, if we had the system that knows who should get what. If we had, maybe this is a job for AI, right? Because I see no reason why HMRC should not know everyone's financial situation. They should know everyone's income at the very least. Like, it's a madness to me they do not know everyone's income. I think that's crazy. And it can only be because governments have decided that, presumably to protect the very wealthy who want their financial information, a bit clouded. Because I can think of no good reason why HMRC just do not know everyone's income. And so it should be possible for Kemi Badenoch, don't let her anywhere near the Treasury, for Rachel Reeves to say, everyone from the age of 67 or above on an income of no greater than this amount should get the £200 winter fuel allowance, and everyone who's 80 years old above and older on below that amount should get the £300, because that's the policy. So it should just be a case of her saying to HMRC, can you arrange this, please? But she can't. We have to base it on who's applied for and successfully got pension credit. It's mad. I mean, the pension credit should be automatic. It's only based, that's means tested. So why does anyone have to apply for any of these things? Why does anyone have to apply for a benefit that is purely means tested? There's no other condition. Well, maybe your age. Well, they've got your date of birth as well. It's mad. Luke saying that rumours that Labour might be going after disability benefits like PIP. What do I think of this? Surely Labour can't be as bad as the Tories on this. No, they won't be. But I also don't know what they're going to do because they haven't announced it yet. We're in the next few weeks. There's obviously a lot of speculation, and I've noticed some of the usual suspects who claim to be on the left wing, who are holding up as gospel articles in the Daily Telegraph, but at the moment we don't know. In the moment, even Liz Kendall doesn't know, although she knows more than us. Because as soon as they know, they announce it. They don't hang about. There's no reason to delay an announcement. As soon as basically the process will be Liz Kendall needed to know what money she has. So on October the 31st, she knew what money her department had. Then she's had to go back to her department and get officials and her other ministers to work on plans on how to best use that money. And then when she's come up with those proposals, that'll have to go through Downing Street, because it has to be clear to make sure there's nothing in there that is politically insane, even though there have been some politically insane policies like the winter fuel allowance that have somehow got through Downing Street. But nonetheless, that's the process. So it has to go through Keir Starmer's office just to make sure that, yes, it's all within the parameters of the government, and then it will be announced. Dentist says, saying, I can see Labour means testing PIP. There's no earnings limit on it. Again, we'll just have to wait and see, I'm afraid. But I'll just go through a couple of comments. So it's ironic that the Tories in their 14 years of cuts plus Brexit and COVID mismanagement reduced the size of the economy from where projected and increased debt by 2/3 of GDP per annum. Yeah, the economy has shrunk in real terms. If you look at the size of I think it's something like 26 to 28% shrinkage. It's really shrunk quite a lot. Now, I am going to say this, to be fair. There are other advanced economies that have also shrunk in real terms. And it's since the banking crisis. And it is because we weren't the only one that mucked up. It's not like only the UK messed up. France did as well. Although sometimes we say, France has got some, like they've, for example, just nationalised all their energy, for example, but they also, I mean, they mostly have right-wingish governments as well, right? So they arsed up. Germany didn't, although Germany has since arsed up by getting a bit too close to Putin. Germany would be, do you know what? They'd be sitting pretty at the moment if it weren't for Nord Stream 2. If they had treated Putin with a great deal more skepticism, then the only big hit to the German economy since the banking crisis would have been Dieselgate, because obviously big car manufacturers, that obviously knocks them. But they've had two big knocks, so obviously their economy at the moment is in the right state. I mean, it's still better than ours, and it's still growing more than ours, percentage wise not, but it is bigger. But yeah, so, but what I want to talk about is the strategic benefit of this, because think about it right now. If the election were next year, or could be next year, then yes, you could understand the Conservatives, right? They need to come up with an economic plan. And yes, we all know that economic plans can mean making difficult decisions. And some of those, and by difficult, I mean unpopular. Whenever a politician talks about making a difficult decision, what they mean is an unpopular decision. Sometimes there are genuinely difficult decisions as well, but mostly it's just that the decision is, there is a right and a wrong decision, and it's not always popular. So they're going to have to come up with something. But do they have to announce it now? Because Kemi Badenoch is saying, don't expect detailed policies just, for a couple of years. And in a way, it's like you can get away with that. Keir Starmer got away with it. He got away with it because the point is he would make, or he did make, was, well, at the time they were aiming for an election in 2023, but in reality they knew it would probably be 2024. But he said 2023 because you usually have an election after 4 years rather than maximum 5. And he was saying we don't know what state the economy is going to be in that time. And Badenoch can say the same thing. You can come up with a load of policies, but by the time Badenoch has to announce those policies, Labour will have had 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years, to implement legislation which could change a lot of things, implement several years of budgets which could change a lot of things. Various things can happen to the global economy, which can, and we are expecting as well, which can change things. So, two sons there. Do you mean Germany would have been doing well, but for Nord Stream 1? I suppose I do. Sorry, yeah. I suppose I did mean that. Yeah, sorry. Um, UK should be more like Singapore. Right, okay. There are some features where I would go, yeah, okay. And there are other ones where it's like, definitely not. Uh, so it depends on which bits you mean there. Um, John there saying, breaking news, Tories spent 134 million on IT system for Rwandan flights that never took place. Yeah, yeah. Yes, I mean, I can imagine what's going to happen this evening. Remember, it's like Saturday evening, so it's the time when a lot of the tasty Sunday paper stories start to be published. So that's what they're going with tomorrow, is it? Okay, excellent. But yeah, so strategically, it just seems really weird for me, for Kemi Badenoch to be even talking about threatening pensions. And because, like, you know, like I said, let me see if I can put it back up here. I mean, Labour, she's attacking Labour for taking £200 a year off certain pensioners. And no one's put the figures to this yet because Labour haven't done anything on it. I mean, they're saying that she's talking about taking your state pension away from you. And the thing is, she's going, oh no, they're twisting my words. But it's like, then be clear about what you mean. Because here's the thing. You know, and I'm going to go back to her exact words again. Her exact words, means testing. So saying there, we're going to look at means testing. That's specifically relating to the triple lock. If you means test the triple lock, that must mean that you intend to have the state pension given to some people on low incomes where the triple lock remains in place. So that's the left-hand column. And it must also mean that either the ones above that means tested threshold, they either, well, she's basically saying they will not get the triple lock. So they're going to get a smaller increase. I mean, it might be in some years it works out the same, sure. But she's suggesting that over the long term, that is going to be a smaller pension. So the state pension for a lot of pensioners, the majority, because even though the Tory press talk about the majority of pensioners being below a certain amount and stuff like that, it's not true. I saw something recently where someone said the majority of people, of pensioners are reliant on the state pension. That is not true. I think the official figure is there's 26%, which is sizable, but it's not true. It's nowhere near a majority. So yeah, it's so you're talking about 3/4 of all pensioners are going to get over 100. I mean, this is me, I think, being conservative, because there's going to be some years where average earnings goes above 2.5% and some years where inflation goes above 2.5%. So unless you're going to keep this sort of pegged to it somehow, unless you're going to keep the non-means tested one somehow pegged to the triple lock as well, which is not what she's suggesting, then there's going to be a group of pensioners much worse off. And in fact, even if we talk about the 5 years of a parliament, right, that still works out at over £50 a month worse off, which is 600 quid a year. Over 600 quid a year. I mean, you look at the fuss they made over 200 quid. What are they going to do about 600 quid? 1,200, 1,300 quid, 1,400 quid. And every single year, the compounding effect of this difference stretches the difference even more. In pound terms, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I agree, you know, at some point, at the moment, we're just doing sticking plasters with pensions. At some point, we're going to have to deal with it properly. And we're probably not going to, because to deal with it properly should really have MPs come together and say, look, let's just work together on this one, and have a proper review that might take 5 years to conduct and then discuss it and stuff like that. You know, whereas in reality, it won't be. It'll be parties going into an election, back of a fag packet calculations on what they're going to do with the pension. Worth remembering that DeFeffel suspended the triple lock in a year when it would have increased 11% and would have compounded that increase since, including for future pensions. Yeah, I mean, we say that it was Rishi Sunak that did it, But yeah, you can blame Boris Johnson if you like. He was the Prime Minister at the end of the day. He was the boss. But yeah, that's what I mean when Kemi Badenoch says and she doesn't just say. She says here, the triple lock is a policy which we supported throughout our 14 years in government. She didn't just say we supported throughout our period in government, because she might have got away with that because there was no whole parliament where they didn't. But there was a year, as you've just said there, and I said earlier, where they did it, where they broke it, where Rishi Sunak was Chancellor. So she is wrong. She is lying to say that it was supported, either that or she forgot. It's wrong to say they'd supported it throughout that time. Rob, they're saying we haven't got 5 years on pensions, feels as a time bomb. My generation, the ones behind, are staying at pension poverty. But the way it is, you look at the situation. It's what we can't afford really is we can't afford to keep getting governments in who shrink the economy. It's one thing if you switched between a sort of left-wing government and a right-wing government who had different ideas about the economy. But what we can't afford is to keep letting governments in who do not prioritise the economy. Because left or right wing, it doesn't matter. There are people on the left who think that prioritising the economy is important. There are people on the right. They just have different ideas about how to do it. But what we keep getting is we keep getting governments who, when it comes to it, don't prioritise the economy. They prioritise wealth, concentrated wealth. Alec, they're saying, when my dad retires, he'll be a higher rate taxpayer without the state pension. Oh, before you even include the state pension. That's a good thing, isn't it? I do like Singapore's zero tolerance on corruption with very severe penalties. Yes, there are some things that Singapore does very well. But there it is. So CPI inflation was increased by 11% that year, so it was needed to keep up. But I mean, again, pensions is always one of those things that, in fact, I was saying this on Graham's stream, yesterday actually, I suppose. If you think about all the government departments, and people value some government departments more than others. Obviously, the Department for Health and Social Care is the most appreciated. I suppose the Treasury as well. But people understand the need for the Home Office, the Foreign Office, the Department for Education, Department for Business and Trade, Department for Energy, all of these things, Department for Justice. People go, yeah, they need budgets. The one department that people resent, even though they'll sort of know we need it, but they resent any spending on it, is the Department for Work and Pensions. Now, we often think of that as manifesting in terms of not wanting to spend much on benefits for people on low incomes, which includes people who are out of work, people who are disabled, or people who are in work, whether disabled or not, but just on very low incomes, right? But the public resent that spending, which is why any government always has a tough time with that. But it also applies to pensions. So although I describe the winter fuel allowance policy as an absolute boneheaded political policy for Labour, people keep quoting Colbert, who's an economist from like the 18th century or 17th century or something, who said that, tax policy is like plucking a goose, where you want to extract the maximum number of feathers with the minimum amount of hissing. Whereas people are describing the winter fuel allowance policy as not really extracting that many feathers, but getting a hell of a lot of hissing. And yeah, if you look at polling, the majority of working age voters agree with Labour's policy. Why? Because they're not pensioners. They're not pensioners. So they just see giving the winter fuel allowance to people. They're not mostly thinking about people who are poor but haven't applied. And they even may think of that, well, why don't they just apply for pension credit then, for goodness sake? But they're thinking of like people who are doing really well, they might even know, their parents might be upper middle class And they're thinking, well, they don't need the 200 quid. And yet all of this thing adds up and I want that money in the NHS. So anything at all that gets spent on like low income benefits, should we say, because I like to distinguish between low income benefits and tax breaks for the wealthy, because they're also benefits. Like when we didn't have VAT on public school fees, that was a benefit for people sending their kids to private school, right? But when we talk about low income benefits and pensions, a lot of people resent them. So, you know, governments will constantly try to reduce the expenditure on it, because it's like they don't, you know, people don't want to pay excessive taxes for things that they don't see as being all that useful. Tim there saying, quote from Starmer, I've got the balls to take an axe to Britain's benefits bill. I've seen that. What do I make of this statement? It's just a statement. It was for the Sun. It's just for Sun readers. It's just basically, I mean, it's like the EU situation, isn't it? I'm not saying there's nothing to worry about and we'll all be happy when Labour announce whatever they're going to announce. But what I am saying is a statement like that can just literally mean, if necessary, I will do this. Well, what if it's not necessary? It's a classic political distraction in that what you're... I'll give you an example, and you may have seen this in your own workplace. So years ago, when I worked in not the last college I worked at, that was really nice, but years and years ago, and I was a much younger teacher. So I worked at a particular college, right? And the management were constantly coming out with stupid bloody things. And I was never shy about saying, that's a stupid idea. But at the same time, you know, I understood they're the boss. If they want me to do it, I'll do it. But I was always one of those who, when they say, oh, do you agree? It's like, no, I don't agree. And when it goes tits up, I'm going to come to you and say, I told you so, right? I was that much of a pain in the arse. Didn't do me any good. But anyway, there was one particular time where they were announcing this thing. You're all going to do this thing. And all the teachers, we all knew this was a stupid bloody idea, right? But a chemistry teacher was going, oh, great idea. Yeah, fantastic. Oh, yeah, I'll get straight onto that. And the thing is, she didn't do it because it was a stupid bloody idea. But because she sounded so positive about it, no one bothered to check on her. They checked on me. They checked on me because I was the one saying what a stupid fucking idea that is. Whose brain fart was that, I was saying? So they were constantly checking that I was doing it, which I would have done anyway. At the end of the day, they're the boss, right? I don't like undermine my managers. I've never done that. And it's the same thing here. If you've got people, like I've just been saying, if you've got people who resent spending on things that they don't see as beneficial to them, you know, and any spending on the Department for Work and Pensions, you've got to remember, the vast majority of people in this country are of working age and are working. So they resent it. So what do you do if you don't want people nosing about too much? You just, oh yeah, I'll absolutely crack down hard on this and blah, blah, blah. Because then you're more likely to think that whatever spending is done is the absolute bare minimum. Because yeah, the Prime Minister said, oh, absolutely, I'll cut this if I need to. So that's all I would say about that. You know, look at all political statements for what they are. He's not saying he's going to cut them. What he's saying is he's prepared to cut them. I'll give you another example from what Starmer said earlier this week as well. So people were talking about regulatory standards and stuff like that. And they were saying, because there's going to be this big, basically, divergence, should we say, maybe a bit of an argy-bargy between the United States and the EU coming up with Trump, and not being an EU fan. And it was about customs because of the tariffs war, I think. And it's sort of about that. And they were saying to Starmer, is it a Brexit benefit that the UK gets to decide its own position now? Now, he sidestepped the question by saying that the UK does get to decide. But then he said, I don't think many people picked up on it, he says there's the US system and there's the EU system, and we get to choose which one is best for us. Now, note what he's not saying there. He's not saying the UK gets to do its own thing. He's saying we are going to have to choose who we align with, the US or the EU. So he's still saying we've got to align with some big trading bloc that's important to us. All he's saying, or the only thing he's saying about the choice is we get to choose which it is. But if you take into account everything else he's said about the difference between the EU and the US, he's going to choose the EU. So in a way, the answer to the question, is it a Brexit benefit, is if he'd have given a detailed answer, was no, because we're going to choose to side with the EU. Again, it's just how politicians have to phrase things. Do we know anything about GB Energy? What do you mean, apart from what's been announced? Do I think, for example, this government may want to bring in small modular nuclear technology to speed our reduction oil and gas dependency? So I've not heard that, in all honesty. It could well be that that would be a good move. I have not seen any plans for it. So no, I think the focus is very much on renewable energy. But I mean, small modular nuclear technology. I mean, I'm not. If we're going to have to keep using nuclear technology for the future, which I guess we are, I'm not opposed to that at all. I think it might be a good idea. But yeah, I've not seen any plans for that, in all honesty. It says carers allowance should not stop when a carer starts receiving their state pension if it doesn't stop them being a carer. I agree with that, Ivan. I agree with that, certainly. Right, I'll tell you what I'll do. There were some questions at the beginning that might be relevant here as well. So I'm just going to go over them. Then we'll come back to some more in here, because I think I've said what I need to say on the pensions. I think it's strategically weird that Kemi Badenoch, when she doesn't need to, and she's saying she's not going to have detailed policies, has decided to threaten the pension, because it doesn't matter how she says Labour's twisting her words. The fact of the matter is she is talking about means testing the triple lock, which means she is talking about getting rid of the triple lock for a good 3/4 of pensioners. Simple as that. Anyway, there was a question earlier saying, with the review into voter ID, could it be scrapped or just more IDs approved? So Labour have already announced before the election that they would not be scrapping voter ID. So, but there are other things that they are looking at. One, yes, increasing the number of voter IDs that we approve. That is definitely in their plan. Another one is automatic registrations. That doesn't help you when you go to the polling booth and you don't have suitable ID granted. But it would, I suppose, if you had automatic registrations, that would be better. But also, it means you can write to people and sort of say, you weren't registered, we've registered you, and then give them the information. Because if they're not registered, they've not been voting anyway. I think one of the big problems with voter ID, wasn't the only one, but one of the big problems is it ironically, could have hit a lot of people who don't vote. Like if you're voting for the first time, imagine you're voting for the first time, your very first polling card arrives. You read it, it's got information on it. Whereas if you've been voting for years and years, like me, your polling card arrived, you could easily just not read it because you get a polling card every time. And the main piece of information on the polling card is you don't need this polling card. Whereas over the last couple of years, it's had some extra information on saying you need to bring voter ID with you. But if people just saw it looked the same as all the other polling cards they've had in their life, so you could easily have people go, polling card in the bin, don't need it. So yeah, it'll give the government the opportunity to write to people and make sure you need one of these things. So yeah, but they have ruled out scrapping it completely. They've obviously decided that is not a political battle worth having. Then there was another one. Now this is related. It's talking about Badenoch. It says, should Labour try to reduce their attacks on Badenoch? Concerned Tories will remove her before the next election, replace her with someone more competent and electable. Now, no. In fact, they should get rid of her as soon as possible. It's the same answer I gave when people said the same thing about Boris Johnson. So what I said about Boris Johnson when he was still hanging around is Boris Johnson was going to go. It was obvious that he was not going to lead them into the next election, particularly after Partygate. But I had said so before anyway. So there was no way he was going to last the Parliament. And from Labour's point of view, it was better to get rid of him as soon as possible. Why? Because then they can work on the next person. Because the next person has a clean slate with the public. So you need to muddy up that slate, right? And the longer the previous leader stays in place, the less time you've got to work on the next one. Now, as it happens, Labour had a next 2, which wasn't expected, but, you know, there you go. So the same thing applies here. Badenoch is very likely to go before the next election. So given that, it's better to get rid of her sooner rather than later, even if it means the Tories actually do pick someone more credible next time. But I am going to say, so, you know, Matthew then did say that Cleverly or Tugendhat could pose a bigger threat to Labour than Badenoch. Now, here's what I would say. Yes and no. So I agree they will present themselves and their party better than Badenoch. Badenoch's just a hot mess. She really is. And I said it, didn't I say it before the election even? I said Kemi Badenoch is as mad as Liz Truss and as bad at politics as Rishi Sunak, right? Tell me I'm wrong. She's absolutely off her trolley. But, yeah, so Cleverly or Tugendhat, absolutely. But I'll tell you this, Cleverly and Tugendhat will be at war with their own party. Because at the moment, the Conservatives are sort of putting on a show of unity. And in actual fact, there could well be some factions in the Conservative Party who aren't quite sure about Kemi Badenoch. Because she's sort of okay with the culture wars. She doesn't want to leave the ECHR. And it's like, so they're not really sure what to make of her at the moment. And that's her, I think that's her plan. She wants to keep them guessing for as long as possible until she feels she's more secure. That's when she'll start announcing things that cause trouble. Because if she is going to lead them into the next election, she's going to have to firm up her policies, and that's when you start to get arguments. So she needs to build up her authority within the party so that when she has to start announcing policies that won't have universal approval within her party, she has to tell them, this is what we need to do, shut up. Whereas I think Cleverly and Tugendhat straight away, people sort of know where they stand on issues. I think they're much less ambiguous. So I think, yes, Cleverly and Tugendhat would be better at being leader of the opposition, shall we say, than Kemi Badenoch is. But I think they will find it harder to keep the party united. James Cleverly might have the best chance if at the next leadership election, if he's still in it, he may not be, remember, but if he's still in it and he gets a very large mandate from the membership, because that always helps. What is also a problem for Kemi Badenoch is she doesn't have a strong mandate. She didn't get a lot of MPs voting for her, and it was, you know, it wasn't an overwhelming mandate from the members either. She didn't win by that much more than Jenrick. It was significantly more than Jenrick, but it wasn't loads more than Jenrick. So she's actually in quite a weak position. Pareto then, she's also as narcissistic as Bojo. Well, that is true, yeah. Quite stunningly arrogant. I mean, I can't believe still, before Christmas, when she said, it might have been November, but she said at some point in a podcast that the reason she doesn't have to U-turn or apologise for what she says is because she thinks very carefully about what she says. And it's like, but she's the person who, when Nigel Farage was going on about his membership, number of members for Reform UK, said, oh, we've checked it out, he's using an automatic ticker, it's fake. And it's like, well, it wasn't. Because straight away there were actual data experts looking at it and going, look, we don't know it's actual membership data, but it's clearly not coming from a ticker. You know, it was clearly feeding in from some genuine data source. So straight away, and Nigel Farage, of course, was demanding an apology and everything. And he can keep that in his back pocket for later, because Kemi Badenoch made a right arse of herself. And so the only reason she's not apologising is not because she's thinking about what she's saying in advance, but just because she's not apologising. It's really that simple. You know, she's also said people who have lunch are wimps. So, like, anyone in this country who has lunch, as far as Kemi Badenoch's concerned, is a wimp. So she's insulted goodness knows how much of the population. She said if you do have to, because she offered a concession. She said, look, I'll tell you what, if you do have to have lunch and you don't want me to call you a wimp, you have to have at least had a steak. That's her concession. And then, I mean, she's offered it. I mean, honestly, the only reason she's not having to U-turn or apologise in what she's saying is because she just refuses to do so. And it's going to get her into real trouble. At the moment, I don't think a lot of the public are really paying much attention to her, because I think they've just, I mean, the Tories, that's it for them, for now anyway, for the foreseeable future. People are done with them. They're not going to let the Tories back in. At the moment, it's all about Labour or Reform UK, which is why Reform UK are doing so well in the polls. Because as far as people are concerned, it's really, I mean, the Conservatives have got a base of support. Labour have got a base of support. And everyone who's not attached to either of them and is not happy with either of them has just gone to Reform UK. Some have gone to the Lib Dems and Greens, of course, by default. But, you know, a lot of them have gone to Reform UK. So, but there's going to come a point where it gets closer to the election. The polling will not show Reform UK on for winning anything. Be interesting to see how they do in comparison with the Conservatives. But there's going to come a point where Labour can start showing the benefits of what they've done, and their polling should go up, and that should squeeze Reform UK back down again. So just by default, you would think the Conservatives will be significantly ahead of Reform UK. And then as you get close to the election, people are going to realise there's only one party to beat Labour, and it's the Conservatives. Reform UK gets squeezed even more. But at that point, that's when people start paying attention to what the Conservative leader is saying. And if the Conservative leader is saying that sandwiches aren't real, then it's like, oh, okay, yeah. So, yeah, I don't think the Conservatives can stick with Badenoch at all. Is a Johnson comeback possible? Cannot see him replicating Trump and winning back power. Johnson also has the Farage factor to deal with. Actually, ironically, Johnson would find it easier to deal with Farage than anyone else the Tories could get, which is why he is a credible possibility. He wants to return. He definitely wants to return. Everyone who's read his book has said this is a book that's basically saying, yeah, I'm coming back, right? Not right now, but yeah, he does want to return. Whether he can, it's another matter. But I'm going to be honest, I would actually think a lot of Conservatives would see him as a more effective foil to Farage, because he is a populist leader himself, but he's one who can lie pretty brazenly and pretty well. And he also gets, although his legacy is shocking, he gets to say that others arsed it up. He gets to say that I put all these things in place and it was arsed up, because, you know, his first proper year with a majority, it was COVID. And then the second proper year, you know, was like dealing with the aftermath. And he could say, you know, I was rolling my sleeves up and getting all this groundwork done. And then in the third year, he was going. That was it. Because even the first half of 2022, he was under massive pressure. And he can say he was being undermined. And then the second half, he was gone. So, yeah, he will just get to claim that he wasn't actually given that he put so many things in place and others mucked it. So I can see, I'm not saying I think Boris Johnson will replace Kemi Badenoch, but I can see him trying to, and I can see him having a certain amount of support in the Conservative Party to do it. Isn't Keynesian economics based on investment into public infrastructure and services? Isn't that what we're starting to get? Yes. Yeah. I mean, Keynesian economics can't kick in immediately, I suppose, because it sort of assumes that you have an economy running normally. So Keynesian economics is essentially the idea that it understands that in economy you have like your boom and bust cycles, the things that Gordon Brown said would never happen again. I still can't get over that. Like, why did Gordon Brown say... Do you know what? It's like every Labour government has to say something mad about the economy, doesn't it? Even, you know, so this Labour government says fastest growing economy in the G7 sustained, which is like, this is never going to happen. Just mathematically is not possible. It's actually not possible. Like, even like America has the strongest economy in the world, so it definitely has the strongest economy in the G7, but it's not always the fastest economy in the G7. So even it can't say fastest growing economy in the G7 sustained, just most of the time. And then the first time it was like Gordon Brown would say no more boom and bust. And it was like the economy boomed and you go, Gordon, this looks like a bit of a boom. Are you sure there's not going to be a bust? No. Are you sure? Because you said no more boom or bust and we've got a boom here. No, it's fine. All right then. 2008. Gordon, what happened there then? Anyway. Lib Dems should reorganise. Two-party systems lead to extremes. I don't think they lead to extremes, because to win you have to appeal largely to the centre. But what they do lead to is massive upheaval when one government replaces another, because it's a complete about face. Labour are not a far left party, and the Conservatives, when they're in power, are not really a far right party. There's a lot of the rhetoric of it, but it's not how they actually operate. So what happens is, but they are very much opposite around. Like, the Conservatives was all about keeping public spending down, even if it means you actually have to jack up taxes to pay for the fact that your economy's strong. Whereas Labour's is, no, we need to actually put infrastructure in place to grow the economy. On the EU, their positions could not be more different, on the attitudes to public services in general, and the attitudes towards wealth distribution in general. You know, whatever it is, it's completely different attitudes, which means you have this massive upheaval. There is no such thing as, oh, let's tweak a few things. Whereas in Ireland, because they have a proportional system, their government is technically changing, but it's not changing a lot. Same with Germany. Germany's government will change after the elections. They'll have a new chancellor. That's a big change, but it won't really change a lot. It'll still be the same groups in charge of the government, just a different balance of power. That's all. But that's no different to having a different balance of power of whichever tribe happens to be in control of Labour at the same time. But there we go. Let's go through the last few comments, the last few minutes. Jeff there saying, speaking of someone who's never had any time for the Tories, if you ask me to write half the shit they've been up to since 2010, I'd blanched at the prospect. I mean, it's 14 years in power. A lot of governments are going to do a lot of things in 14 years of power, especially when they burn through. I've got to count now. Hang on. 5 prime ministers, was it? Cameron, May, Johnson. Yeah, 5 prime ministers they burned through in 14 years. It's mental. Like, you can sort of understand having to regularly change your leader if you keep losing elections. But in 14 years, the Conservatives had 5 different leaders whilst they were in government. And Labour, now if we don't count Gordon Brown, because obviously he had to resign when he lost, if you count the leaders that Labour had in opposition, it was 3. Again, I'm not counting interim leaders. But actual leaders who had to lead them in opposition, they had 3 in the same period of time. And it is still only 4 if you count Gordon Brown. But again, he would have to have gone anyway when they lost. You say the FDP not being in the Bundestag will probably change things more than excuse me, usual for Germany, even if the AfD are shown the door. The AfD, of course, are not going to work in coalition with them. With anyone who can form a government. Yeah, there will be a change. What I'm saying is, but there won't be a massive change. The 2 big parties in Germany will still be the 2 big parties within the government. You know, even if they're not the 2 biggest parties in the Bundestag at the end of it, they're still going to be the 2 biggest parties in the government, surely. I mean, we don't know the results yet, but we can see from polling, it can't be that much wrong, can it? In economic terms, what is neoliberalism? Neoliberalism is where you try to... It's basically it's austerity. It's where you try to reduce public expenditure to make the state as small as possible. I mean, the difference with different advocates of neoliberalism is exactly what should the state provide. So people on the very far right wing, as in not far right as in we like Nigel Farage, but, you know, very right wing, they would view you need a police force. The state has to manage the police force because you need that to keep the plebs in line. The armed forces, you need to manage the armed forces. You can't have a private armed forces because that's a mercenary force and that tends to go quite badly. So you need a military to keep the foreigners from like sniffing around. But that's probably pretty much it. Whereas there are other neoliberals who are not as right wing as that, who will also accept you should probably build roads and a few other bits and pieces as well. But not, you wouldn't have the health service would be privatised, the schools would be privatised, you know. So that's essentially neoliberalism, that the state should be as small as possible, that the government should run as little as possible, which is the furthest thing from Labour's approach. Blame Labour's internal leadership rules make it difficult to remove a leader. Corbyn stayed on despite a no confidence vote in 2016. But no, you can't be getting rid of leaders too easily, because they have to make difficult decisions. You can't, if Corbyn taught us anything, and I think he taught us several things, but if he taught us anything, you cannot have a leader that just panders to the base and expect to win elections. Like, it's not impossible, because if the alternative does the same thing at the same time, well, one of you has to win, right? But it's not a good system. You have to. It is absolutely essential, and this would apply even with PR, by the way. But in first past the post, where it's winner takes all, it's absolutely crucial. You have to. When people say, "Oh, they're taking my vote for granted," they have to. They needed to take my vote for granted. They had to take my vote for granted, because they had to chase after the votes of people who will vote Conservative one election and Labour the next. They had to do that, and they did that with my full blessing, because I wanted them in power. Even if it means they have to do some things which I think you shouldn't be doing that, and they do other things where I think that's not as good as it should be. You know, probably there's only about 20% of what they're going to do that I go, yeah, that's what I would do as well. But that is better than 0%. And actually, most of the rest of it, I mean, I would say, I don't want to just like throw random figures out, but I'm going to anyway. I would say there's probably about 20% of what they're doing, which I think is, yes, that's good. There's probably another 70% where it's like, okay, well, that's better than what we've got now. So it's progress, but it's not necessarily good enough. And then maybe 10%, which is there, that's going backwards. Can you not do that? But there we go. Am I going to do a video on Biden's farewell address? No. I will probably do a video on Trump's inauguration, though, because I am anticipating something happening, which I already know is going to happen, but I'll wait till it's happened, which is going to be hilarious. So I am going to do it on the inauguration, I think. Unless the hilarious thing doesn't happen, in which case I won't bother. But do you know what? I was looking through my little list of things to do for this week, because there's just some news. There's actually some news, which is good. So, you know, the views are still depressed on YouTube, but there is at least now quite a few little topics coming up, and several of them relate to US politics, which I did say, some of you may remember, round about the time of the US election, I did actually make a point of saying I could have done loads more videos on the US presidential election, but I'm very this channel is really about politics affecting Westminster. It's Westminster politics, so I didn't want to go too much in a different direction, because then you sort of skew your audience. You basically might put off some parts of your audience that you want to retain, and gain others who will then be pissed off later on when you stop doing it. So I deliberately suppressed it with the understanding, you know. But now I'm going to have to I'm going to be talking about American politics every week, I think. Honestly, I think it's going to be multiple videos a week. Because it's affecting UK politics. Elon Musk is proper sticking his nose in. Trump is obviously, his policies are going to have an impact on us. So, yeah. But I don't want to go mad. I don't want it to be like an American video, like a US politics video, like every day or even every second day. I want to still try and limit it. So I'll try and focus on what are the ones that are either the funniest, like the Elon Musk one today, or the most relevant ones. I'm going to say Labour need to get better for their disabled members, myself included. We need to feel included and appreciated. Yes, I agree. They need to say what we can do to help. So, and well, that's, again, communications. But, I mean, for the moment, what we need to do is to wait and find out what their actual policies are for the spending review. Not spending review, sorry. The DWP's plan to cut the benefits budget without screwing over people that need them. John, they're saying inauguration should be for over 18s only. Well, it could well be, because it's all going to be indoors now. They can't have it outdoors because it's a bit cold. Now, if it were Kamala Harris, if this was happening with Kamala Harris, if she'd have won and the inauguration's having to be moved inside because it's too cold, do you know what the Republicans would be saying? This is God saying they don't approve of Kamala Harris. That's what they'd be saying. They'd be saying the cold weather's sent by God to teach us a lesson. But it's Trump, so they're not doing. But anyway, Sarah's just said at the end there, hi Phil. Hi Sarah, and bye Sarah, I'm afraid. Because we're running out of time. There we go. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day. And until next time, I will see you later.